My name is Vivian Ashworth. I was 26 when I learned that love, given without limit, can be spent by someone else without a single word of thanks. The apartment we shared back then was small enough that I could stand in the kitchen and still see him working at the folding table by the window, hunched over spreadsheets and half-written business plans, a cup of cold coffee sweating a ring into the wood. I remember the sound most, the scratch of his pen, the hum of the refrigerator, the particular silence of two people who love each other but are too tired to say so out loud. I was an administrative assistant then, though I told people I was in operations, because it sounded like it mattered. I worked days, and some nights I typed his proposals after he'd fallen asleep with his glasses still on. I picked up freelance bookkeeping on weekends. I learned to make dinner out of almost nothing, and to make it taste like more than that. When our first daughter, Lily, was born, I went back to work 6 weeks later because Daniel's company, the one I helped build with quiet, unglamorous labor, couldn't afford to lose momentum. I don't say this to sound like a martyr. I say it because it's simply what happened, the way weather happens, the way seasons turn without asking permission. There's a particular kind of tired that isn't about sleep. It's the tired of being the invisible architecture underneath someone else's visible life. I felt it in my shoulders. I felt it in the way I stopped finishing sentences because I already knew how they'd end, with me doing whatever needed to be done. Daniel used to say in those early years, "When we make it, this will all be worth it. You'll see." I believed him the way you believe a friend that some good is coming, evidence be damned. The night his company got its first real investor, he came home holding a bottle of wine we couldn't afford and lifted me off the ground in the doorway, laughing, and I laughed too, and for a moment the folding table and the cold coffee and the 6-week-old baby crying in the next room all seemed like the price of admission to something better. I didn't know yet that I had already given him the only thing he'd ever really need from me. Success changes people slowly, the way water changes stone. You don't see it happening. You only notice, one day, that the shape of things is different. The company grew. Daniel began traveling, first for pitch meetings, then for something called strategic partnerships, a phrase that eventually swallowed entire weeks. I stayed home with Lily and, 2 years later, our son, Theo. I told myself this was a season, not a sentence. I remember the exact evening the language between us changed. Daniel came home from a trip to speak at a conference. His name was on the program now, in a font larger than I'd ever seen it, and I asked, gently, how it felt to see his own name like that. He looked at me the way you look at someone standing too close to a painting, blocking the view. "You wouldn't really understand what that world is like," he said. Not cruelly. Almost kindly, the way you'd explain something to a child. "It's a different pace up there." I laughed it off. I told myself I was tired, reading too much into a tired man's tired words. But it kept happening. Small things. He stopped asking about my day because I think my days had stopped sounding like his. He started introducing me at company events as my wife. She takes care of the kids, as if that sentence contained the whole of me, filed and closed. Once, at a dinner with his investors, a woman asked what I did, and before I could answer, Daniel said, warmly, dismissively, "Oh, Viv's not really in the industry." Not really in the industry. As if I hadn't typed his first 10 proposals at 2 in the morning. As if the industry hadn't been built, in part, on the folding table in that small apartment. I began keeping a private folder on an old laptop, not out of suspicion yet, just habit, the instinct of someone who had learned early that no one else would keep the record of her own life. Emails. Old proposals with my handwriting in the margins. Photos of the apartment. I told myself it was sentimental. Some part of me, I think, already knew it was something closer to evidence. Theo started kindergarten. Lily started asking why Daddy missed her recital. I started noticing that the office had become a word Daniel said with a particular softness, a fondness he no longer extended to our kitchen table. I found out the way most women find out, not through confession, but through a small, stupid accident. His phone, face up on the counter, a name I didn't recognize glowing on the screen. Not a scandal, not yet. Just a name, Renata, and a message that read, simply, "Miss you already. Same time Thursday?" I didn't confront him that night. I want to be honest about that because I think honesty is the only thing I have left that's entirely mine. I didn't scream. I didn't throw anything. I sat at the kitchen table, a different table now, in a house his success had bought, and I felt something inside me go very quiet, the way a room goes quiet after a door closes somewhere far away. I thought about the folding table. I thought about 6 weeks after Lily was born, sitting at my desk with a healing body and a swollen heart, answering emails so his company wouldn't lose a client. I thought about all the versions of myself I had folded up and put away to make room for his becoming. For weeks, I watched. Not out of jealousy. Jealousy would have been almost a relief, something hot and simple. What I felt was colder than that. I watched him kiss our children goodnight, and then check his phone in the hallway with a softness in his face that used to be for me. I watched him grow careless, the way people do when they've stopped believing anyone is paying attention. I found out about Renata's position at his company. I found out about a wire transfer to an apartment across town, filed under consulting fees. I found out, slowly and without drama, that the man who once told me I'd understand his world had built an entire second one, quietly, in the margins of the first. I didn't hate him, not in the way you might expect. What I felt was closer to grief for the version of him I had spent a decade defending to myself. One night, after the kids were asleep, I sat at that kitchen table with my old laptop and began, methodically, to write everything down. Not to destroy him. I want to be clear about that because for a long time I wasn't sure myself what I was building. I only knew that I was tired of being the only witness to my own life. There's a particular kind of power and patience that no one warns you about until you're forced to learn it. I spent 3 months gathering what I needed, not out of malice, but because I understood, finally, that truth without proof is just a feeling, and feelings could be talked away by a man who is very, very good at talking. I kept copies of early contracts with my handwriting in the margins. I kept the emails where I had, in my old job title, negotiated our first office lease. I kept bank statements. I kept, most carefully, the small mountain of unpaid, unrecognized labor that had quietly financed his rise, labor that, under the partnership agreement neither of us had ever formally dissolved, made me more than a wife waiting at home. It made me, legally, a co-founder no one had bothered to remember. I didn't tell my sister. I didn't tell my mother. I told no one because I had learned, somewhere in that decade, that safety sometimes looks like silence. The day Daniel told me he wanted a divorce, he did it over coffee, in the kitchen, with the particular gentleness of a man who believes he is being kind. He told me he'd grown, that we had grown apart, that Renata understood the pace of his life, in ways I never could. He offered a settlement. Generous, he called it. Generous enough, I understood, to make me disappear quietly. I remember looking at him, really looking, the way you look at a stranger you're meeting for the first time, and feeling something settle in my chest that wasn't rage. It was clarity. I'll consider it, I told him. But you should talk to a lawyer before you offer me anything else. He laughed, confused. He had never heard that particular calm in my voice before. I don't think he recognized it as the sound of a door quietly closing. That night, after he left for Renata's apartment, no longer hiding it, now that the ending had begun, I sat at my laptop and opened the folder I had kept for 10 years without fully understanding why. I began, finally, to make copies. I hired a lawyer named Marisol Foam, a woman with tired eyes and a voice like still water, who read through my documents for 2 hours without saying a word. When she finally looked up, she asked only one question. Did you ever sign anything giving up your interest in the company? I hadn't. In the chaos of early success, in the blur of 2 babies and 1 exhausted marriage, that particular piece of paper had simply never been drawn up. Daniel, brilliant in every way except the ways that would have protected him from me, had never closed that door. What followed wasn't a war. I want to say that clearly because I never wanted a war. I wanted only for the truth to finally take up as much space as it deserved. We met in a conference room that smelled like new carpet, Daniel in a suit that cost more than our first month's rent had. Renata seated 2 chairs down from him now, not hiding anymore either. I brought Marisol. I brought the folder. I brought, most of all, A version of myself I hadn't met in years, steady, unhurried, unwilling to shrink. I didn't raise my voice. I laid out, calmly, 10 years of contracts and margins and unpaid labor, 10 years of a company built, in no small part, at a folding table by a woman he had once introduced as someone who wasn't really in the industry. I watched Daniel's face change as he understood, slowly, that the woman he had planned to make disappear held, in her hands, the paperwork that made disappearing impossible. "I'm not here for revenge," I told him, and I meant it. "I'm here for what's true. There's a difference, and I think you've forgotten it." He didn't apologize. Men like Daniel rarely do, not fully, not in rooms with lawyers present. But something in him deflated, quietly, the way a balloon does when you're not looking directly at it. Not a burst, just a slow return to its true size. The settlement took 4 months. I won't pretend the number didn't matter. It did, because it meant Lily and Theo would never have to feel the particular fear of not enough that I had carried through my 20s. But by the time the papers were signed, the money had become almost beside the point. What mattered more was smaller, quieter. It was Lily, 11 years old by then, asking me one evening why Daddy didn't live with us anymore, and me finding, for the first time in years, that I could answer her honestly without flinching. Sometimes, I told her, people forget who helped them become who they are. And when they forget, they have to learn it again, usually the hard way. She thought about that for a long moment, the way children do when they're testing an idea against the shape of their own lives. "Did you help him?" she asked. "I did," I said. For a long time, that was the thing I was proudest of. "Are you still proud of it?" I remember the question sitting in the room with us, patient, waiting. "I'm proud of what I built," I told her finally. "I'm just not going to build it invisibly anymore." Theo, younger, understood less and felt more. He would ask, sometimes, if Daddy was coming to his games, and I learned to answer without bitterness, because bitterness is a weight you shouldn't hand to a child. "I don't know," I'd say, "but I'll be there. I'm always going to be there." Daniel came around in fragments over the following year, a recital here, a birthday there, awkward and diminished in ways that had nothing to do with money, and everything to do with the particular loneliness of a man who has run out of people willing to make him look bigger than he is. I used part of the settlement to do something I hadn't let myself imagine in over a decade. I started my own consulting firm, helping small companies with the unglamorous architecture I understood better than almost anyone. Operations, structure, the quiet scaffolding that holds a business up long before anyone notices it's there. The first time I put my name on a lease of my own, I stood in the empty office for a long time before I turned on the lights. I thought about the folding table. I thought about the woman who once typed proposals at 2 in the morning and told herself it was temporary. I thought about how long temporary can stretch if you let it, if no one, including you, ever calls it by its real name. Renata, I heard later, left Daniel within the year. I felt, to my own surprise, no satisfaction in that. Only a distant, weathered kind of recognition. The understanding that a man who treats one woman's labor as invisible will, eventually, do the same to the next. Business built slowly, the way honest things usually do. But it built. Clients came by word of mouth, then by reputation. Lily started telling people, with a pride that caught in my throat every time, "My mom runs her own company." Theo drew a picture, once, for a school project on someone who inspires me, a stick figure at a desk with a sign that said Mom's Office, crayon letters uneven and sincere. I framed it. It hangs across from my actual desk now, where I can see it every day I sit down to work. People sometimes ask me, carefully, as if the question might break something, whether I regret the years I spent building someone else's success before I built my own. I've turned the question over enough times to know the honest answer isn't simple. I don't regret the labor. I regret the silence I kept around it. The years I let temporary describe a decade. The years I let someone else's name be the only one on the door. I think often of that first apartment, of the folding table by the window, of the particular hush of 2 tired people who loved each other and were too exhausted to say so. I don't hate that woman I was. I understand her. She was doing what she believed love required. It took me a long time to learn that love, real love, doesn't require your disappearance as its price. Daniel and I are civil now, mostly for the children's sake. Brief exchanges at pickup, polite nods at graduations. He is, I think, still building something. I hope, for his sake, that whoever helps him build it this time gets to keep her name on the wall. As for me, some evenings after the kids are asleep and the office is quiet, I sit at my desk beneath Theo's crayon drawing, and I think about how long I mistook invisibility for love, how long I confused disappearing with devotion. I don't disappear anymore. Not for anyone. My name is Vivian Ashworth. I was 26 when everything changed, and 38 when I finally understood that the changing had been mine to choose all along. Vivian's story isn't really about a divorce, or even about Daniel. It's about the years so many of us spend making ourselves smaller so someone else's life can be bigger, and the quiet, unglamorous courage it takes to finally stop. She didn't win by destroying him. She won by refusing to disappear. The folding table, the 6-week maternity leave, the she's not really in the industry. None of it broke her. It built her, slowly, into a woman who knew exactly what she was owed and exactly how to claim it without losing herself in the process. That's the real inheritance she leaves her children. Not the settlement, not the office with her name on the door, but the proof that being underestimated for a decade doesn't mean you have to stay that way forever. If Vivian's story resonated with you, if you've ever felt like the invisible architecture underneath someone else's visible life, you're not alone, and it's not too late to change the ending. Like this video if you believe quiet labor deserves loud recognition. Share this with someone who needs to hear that temporary doesn't have to become forever. Comment below. What's one thing you stopped doing invisibly once you finally saw your own worth? And if this story moved you, subscribe, because next week we're telling another woman's story of walking away from small rooms and into ones with her name on the lease.